Continuing our journey back in time, we'll be looking at some iconic stadiums that were demolished in the 2000s. And just so we're clear, this is from 2000 to 2009. There were a lot of stadiums demolished in this period, so to keep the video from getting too long, we'll keep it to 10 per video and break it up into 2 or 3 parts. So here are 10 stadiums demolished in the 2000s. Three Rivers Stadium, home to the Pirates of Major League Baseball and the Steelers of the NFL. It's a pretty typical example of a concrete donut, and you can certainly see why they get that nickname. The exterior was basically all concrete and, unlike a regular donut, looked rather bland. I'm not sure how it tasted. On the inside, the seating was fairly evenly distributed, which is normal for football but left thousands of unwanted seats for baseball, which were usually tarped off. But the great shame with that was that despite the name, you'd have no clue when sitting inside the stadium that you were located where two rivers become one. You also missed out on a fantastic view of the Pittsburgh skyline. Their replacements, however, certainly do make the most of it, particularly PNC Park that was built just across the road. Heinz Field was built on the other side. The size of the old stadium is nothing much, just some regular buildings. Wembley Stadium. The iconic home of English football started out as what was meant to be a temporary stadium, built for the British Empire exhibition. But unlike the British Empire itself, the stadium was saved from its seemingly inevitable demise, and went on to witness everything from an Olympic Games to a World Cup final over the years. The seating situation was quite interesting. It had a split-level single-tier bowl, but with a very small upper deck that sort of hovered above. I can't think of any stadiums today that look quite like that. By the late 90s, Wembley was really showing its age, and it was decided that a brand new stadium would have to be built. The towers had to go, but a new icon was born on the same site. Today's Wembley Stadium's arch can be seen from miles away, because it's big. Kingdome, home to multiple teams, but the Mariners and the Seahawks had the longest stay. Kingdome is a pretty cool name, and it's not as contrived as it may seem. Officially it was called the King County Stadium. Kingdome was the obvious progression. The exterior, once again, was a little dull, pure concrete, but on the inside it's not quite as donut-like as Three Rivers Stadium. There are noticeably less seats beyond the outfield wall, but still it was a stadium designed for football that could also host baseball. The sad part is, for a while, all of the city's professional outdoor sport teams, including the Sounders, played their games indoors where the spectators never saw the light of day, which I'm not a fan of. One benefit of the dome though, besides the lack of rain, was that it got incredibly loud in there. Now the Seahawks and the Sounders play here. This was built on the same site, and the Mariners moved to a retractable roof stadium next door. Stadio delle Alpi, Juventus. The roof structure was perhaps the most impressive aspect of this stadium's design. I love the addition of these sunshades behind each end, that's pretty cool. But also there was a center-hung video board suspended from a steel frame that stretched across the field. It was pretty small and the spectators were quite far away, but still for the time it was quite impressive. They did really want to show off because it was built prior to the 1990 World Cup where it hosted some games. And clearly it also had aspirations to host major athletics events as well. But unfortunately, Italy's top club doesn't really want to be playing at a stadium with a track around the field. And that's why by European standards this stadium had a fairly short lifespan. It was replaced with Allianz Stadium built on the same site. Hang on. Are they the same A-frame things from the old stadium with a new paint job? They must be. That's a nice touch. Lansdowne Road was home to Irish rugby and Leinster rugby, and was the oldest rugby stadium in the world. In fact, it's so old that back in the day, people used to take their horse down to Lansdowne Road. There's actually a hit song written about it, but they had to change the lyrics for legal reasons. The design resembles quite a few stadiums across the country with its uncovered ends that were terraces for the longest time, but later converted into seating. It did, however, have its own unique character. I particularly like those Tudor-inspired club rooms. The east stand was probably the only part of the stadium that didn't look 100 years old. As for its replacement, well, I don't even care. You can't just go knocking down such an historic Ooh, never mind. It was replaced by one of my favorite stadiums in Europe, built on the same site. Yankee Stadium, New York Yankees. After being kicked out of their previous stadium by the Giants, the baseball team now based in San Francisco, they decided that they'd build their own stadium. When it was finished in 1923, it was much larger than any baseball stadium in the world, and was actually the first triple-tiered stadium in the country. The main reason for that was a certain Babe Ruth, who I like to call the Don Bradman of baseball. But if you ever tell a New Yorker that, you'll be met with a, "Who the f***'s Don Bradman?" Cause it turns out cricket is just an insect over there. And maybe a phone company anyway. The interior design that you're probably familiar with was mostly built in the 70s when the stadium was given a major overhaul. The exterior, however, stayed more or less the same since its inception. And the new Yankee Stadium built right next door mimics that design. The site is now a 3-in-1 ballpark. Main Road, Manchester City. It actually opened the same year as Yankee Stadium, but cost less than 1/10 of the price. Despite this, it had a bigger capacity, largely due to the vast amount of standing room available, which was commonplace back then. Over the years, however, new stands were added, but evidently none of them were built at the same time or were of the same design. So by the 21st century, the stadium had a very hodgepodge look to it, even by English football standards, which is saying something. Symmetry is overrated anyway, it looked fine. But instead of a potential expansion, Man City moved here. And the site is now home to homes. Waverley Park. Initially, this Australian rules football stadium was going to have a monstrous capacity of over 150,000. Unbelievable considering it was built out in the suburbs. But the league had plans for it to become the home of football, rather than the MCG. It ended up having a capacity of around half that and only ever hosted a grand final once when the MCG was being renovated. That game was won by Hawthorn, who now actually train at the ground. Oh, and speaking of Yankees, their theme song is the tune of "We're a happy team at Hawthorn." Yankee Doodle Dandy. You can probably tell by now it's the team I go for. As you can see, the training facility still has a small section of the stadium remaining. It's heritage listed, so it can't be touched. But who knows, they may have kept it anyway. It now has the weight rooms and whatnot inside. Hawthorn and St Kilda, who were the primary tenants in the later years, play here and here respectively. Wankdorfstadion. It's home to a team called Young Boys, and yes, we've spoken about its successor before, Stadion Wankdorf. And I know they do have funny names, but the stadium is no longer with us, so I'll show some respect. It has hosted a World Cup final after all. In fact, the stadium that you see here was a result of a complete rebuild prior to the 1954 World Cup. In that final, the seemingly infallible Hungarian side lost to West Germany. Switzerland is famously neutral, but they speak German in Bern, so perhaps the Germans felt at home. As for the design, I'm sure it was state of the art back then, but by the time it was demolished, it was antiquated to say the least, with wooden benches and not much in the way of covered seating. The aforementioned Stadion Wankdorf was built in its place. Miami Orange Bowl. The Miami Hurricanes had the longest stay here, but the Dolphins played here as well. And before you question the fact that the stadium is not actually a bowl, it was of course named after the Orange Bowl game, which it hosted from just a few years after the game's inception in the mid-30s until the mid to late 90s. Not being a complete bowl afforded some spectators a view of the Miami skyline, filtered through the palm trees, which is always nice. Oh, and at one point you'd also get a view of a live dolphin in a tank. But ever since the Dolphin riots of '86, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen anymore. The Dolphins team, as well as the Hurricanes and the Orange Bowl, moved to Hard Rock Stadium. The site is now Marlins Park. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. And I usually say thanks for watching, have a good one, but this is an extra special thanks for watching. Because I know my voice, it takes a toll, it's kind of annoying, and the fact that you've made it this far into the video, I commend you. Have a good one.